Welcome back. Tonight I have three stories for you. Three separate cases. Three different people. Three situations that started with something small and ordinary. A noise, a photograph, a knock at the door, and ended in ways that nobody who was there has ever been able to fully explain. As always, stay with me until the end. The last one is the worst. Let's get into it. Story 1. The Photographer. In the summer of 2011, a freelance photographer named Daniel Marsh was hired to document the demolition of an old textile mill in Greensboro, North Carolina. It was not a glamorous assignment. The mill had been abandoned since the early 90s, bought by a development company that planned to replace it with condominiums, and Daniel's job was simply to create a visual record of the structure before it came down. Before and after shots. Architectural documentation. The kind of work that pays modestly and requires almost no creative input. Daniel was 31 years old. He had been doing freelance work for 6 years. He was good at his job, reliable, unflappable. His colleagues described him, when investigators later spoke to them, as the least dramatic person they had ever worked with. That detail matters, because what Daniel reported over the following 3 weeks was the kind of thing that, coming from almost anyone else, would have been dismissed immediately. He spent 2 days photographing the mill's exterior, standard work. Then on the third day, he went inside. The building was structurally sound enough to enter. The demolition team had confirmed that. But it had been empty for nearly 2 decades, and it looked it. Broken glass, collapsed sections of ceiling, old machinery left behind, rusting in place. The smell of damp and rot, and something chemical that Daniel couldn't identify and didn't try to. He spent the morning on the ground floor, working methodically, room by room, documenting everything. In the early afternoon, he went upstairs. The second floor of the mill was largely open plan, a vast weaving room that took up most of the floor, filled with rows of old looms, still in place, still threaded with rotted fiber that hung in curtains from the machinery. The light came through dirty windows along the north and south walls, low and diffuse, and Daniel spent an hour in there working through his shot list. He was nearly done when he noticed the figure at the far end of the room. He assumed it was a member of the demolition crew. The figure was standing at the end of one of the loom rows, partially obscured by the hanging fiber, facing away from him. Dark clothing. Still, Daniel called out. The figure didn't respond. He walked toward it, still not alarmed. People don't respond when they're wearing ear protection. The figure was maybe 40 feet away, then 30, then 20, and at about 15 feet, Daniel stopped. Because the figure was not wearing ear protection, and it was not a member of the demolition crew. And it was facing away from him, but its head was turned at an angle that was not right. Not the angle of someone who has heard something and is turning to look. Something else. Something that suggested the neck had a different relationship with the rest of the body than necks are supposed to have. Daniel took a photograph. He did this automatically, the way a photographer does. The instinct to document firing, before the instinct to process what he was seeing. Then the figure was gone, not walking away, not stepping back, gone, between one moment and the next. Daniel left the building and did not go back inside that day. That evening, he downloaded his photographs from the day. He went through them in order, methodically, the way he always did. Ground floor, stairwell, second floor weaving room. He found the photograph he had taken of the figure. The figure was there, partially obscured by the hanging fiber, just as he remembered, facing away, head at that wrong angle. This was consistent with what he had seen. What was not consistent with what he had seen was the rest of the photograph. Because in the photograph, there were other figures, not one, 11, distributed throughout the weaving room, standing between the loom rows, some partially obscured, some fully visible, all facing away, all still. Daniel had seen one. The camera had captured 12. He told himself it was a lens artifact, a processing error. He had been shooting in low light with a wide aperture, and there were curtains of rotting fiber hanging from every loom. It was entirely possible that shapes in the fabric had read as figures in the image. He told himself this for 3 days. Then he went back and looked at the photograph again. One of the figures, not the one he had seen, a different one standing near the window on the south wall, was wearing clothing he recognized. A specific jacket, distinctive pattern. He had seen that jacket before. He had seen it on a photograph on his own mantelpiece. A photograph of his father, who had died in 2003. He told himself he was wrong, misremembering the jacket, projecting. The human brain finds faces and familiar things in random visual noise. It is one of the most well-documented quirks of human perception, and Daniel knew this and reminded himself of it firmly. He enlarged the image. He was not wrong about the jacket. Daniel Marsh did not complete the documentation assignment. He called the development company, told them he had a family emergency, and recommended another photographer. He never returned to the mill. He kept the photograph. He did not show it to anyone for 2 years. In 2013, he showed it to a colleague named Susan Trent, a photographer he trusted. He showed her without context, without telling her what she was looking at or what he had seen in the building. Susan looked at it for a long time. Then she asked him where it was taken. He told her. She was quiet for another moment. Then she said, "Daniel, how many people do you think are in this photograph?" He told her 12, 11 that he hadn't seen, and 1 that he had. Susan looked at him. Then she looked at the photograph again. Then she said, "I count 19. Daniel took the photograph back and looked at it himself. He counted. He had been looking at this image for 2 years. He knew every figure in it. He had studied it until he could have drawn the room from memory. He counted 23. The number was different every time. Not because the image was changing, because whatever was in that photograph was not something the human eye could hold all at once. Every time you looked, you saw more, as if there were things in it that only became visible once you knew to look. Daniel still has the photograph. He does not look at it anymore. He keeps it in a folder in a drawer, and he has not opened the drawer in 4 years. He told the person who eventually documented his account that the worst part was not the figures. The worst part was a detail he noticed the last time he looked, which was the time he counted 23. One of the figures, near the back of the room, was no longer facing away. Story 2. The 911 call. At 3:14 in the morning on March 8, 2016, a 911 dispatcher in Cullman County, Alabama, received a call from a residential address on the outskirts of the county. The caller was a woman named Diane Purcell, 57 years old, retired schoolteacher, lived alone in a house she had owned for 22 years following her divorce. No prior calls to emergency services, no criminal record, no history of mental illness on file. The call lasted 9 minutes and 41 seconds. It was recorded, as all 911 calls are, and the recording was later reviewed by investigators, the county sheriff, and a state-level consultant brought in because of what the call contained. The transcript of that call has never been officially released. What follows is drawn from accounts given by people who heard the recording. Diane Purcell called 911 because someone was knocking on her front door. This sounds unremarkable. People call 911 for unexpected visitors in the night all the time. What made this call different was what Diane said about the knocking. She said it had been going on for 6 hours. She said it had started just after 9 in the evening. A knock at the front door. 3 knocks, she said, very specific about this. Not a doorbell, not pounding. 3 deliberate knocks. She had looked through the peephole and seen no one. She had turned on the porch light. Nothing. 20 minutes later, 3 more knocks. She had called out. She had asked who was there. No response. She had checked every window. Nothing visible in the dark outside. This continued, she told the dispatcher, every 20 minutes for 6 hours. 3 knocks, 20-minute interval, never varying, never escalating, patient. The dispatcher, a man named Roy Hicks, who had been doing the job for 14 years, said later that the thing that unnerved him most was not the content of what Diane was describing. It was her voice. She was not hysterical. She was not panicking. She was calm in the way that people get calm when they have been frightened for so long that the fear has exhausted itself and left something else behind. Something quieter and worse. Roy dispatched a unit and stayed on the line with Diane while they waited. While they waited, Diane told him some other things. She said that around midnight, 3 hours into the knocking, she had started to feel like the sound wasn't coming from the front door anymore, like it was moving. She said by 1 in the morning, she was certain it was coming from different place. The front door, then the back door, then the side of the house where there was no door at all, just siding. Always 3 knocks, always the same interval. She said by 2 in the morning, she had realized the sound was inside the house. Roy asked her to clarify. She said, "I mean, the knocking was coming from inside the walls, from inside the house, like something was moving through the structure of it and knocking from the inside." She said she had gone through every room. She had seen nothing. She had found nothing. The knocking continued. She said, "Roy," she was using his name by this point. He had given it to her. "Roy, I need to tell you something, and I need you to not treat me like I'm crazy." Roy told her to go ahead. She said that about 40 minutes before she called, so roughly around 2:30 in the morning, the knocking had stopped. Complete silence. After 5.5 hours of that precise, unvarying rhythm, silence. She said the silence lasted about 10 minutes. Then she said she heard it again. But this time, she said, it wasn't knocking. Roy asked her what it was. She said, "It's breathing through the walls. It's breathing and it's moving, and I can hear it going from room to room." Roy stayed on the line. The unit was 4 minutes out. Then Diane said something that Roy Hicks told the investigators he had never been able to stop thinking about in the 8 years since that night. She said, "Roy, it stopped moving." He asked her where it had stopped. She said, "It's right behind the wall I'm standing against." Roy told her to move away from the wall. He told her to move to the center of the room. He told her the unit was almost there. Diane Purcell moved to the center of the room, and then she made a sound that Roy Hicks said he could not describe. Not a scream. Not exactly. He said it was the sound a person makes when they see something that the brain refuses to process as real. A sound that is trying to be a scream but can't find the mechanism for it. The call went silent 11 seconds after that sound. Deputies arrived at the house 4 minutes later. They found the front door unlocked. All the lights were on. Diane's phone was on the kitchen floor where she had dropped it. Diane Purcell was not in the house. She was found the following morning, at first light, sitting in the field behind her property, approximately 300 yards from the house. She was unharmed, physically. She was sitting cross-legged in the frost, facing away from the house, and she did not respond when the deputies called her name. She remained unresponsive for 11 hours. When she came back, and the deputies and the medical staff who were with her said it felt like coming back, like watching someone return from somewhere very far away. The first thing she said was, "Don't go in the house." They asked her why. She said, "Because it's still in there, and it knows I called for help, and it's angry." Diane Purcell refused to return to the house. She stayed with her sister in Decatur, and the house was left empty. A follow-up inspection by the county sheriff found no evidence of forced entry, no evidence of any intruder, no explanation for the sounds Diane had described. 3 weeks later, the neighbors on the adjacent property reported something to the county. They said they had started hearing knocking. 3 knocks from inside the walls every 20 minutes. Story 3, the last one. I want to be upfront with you about this third story. I have told a lot of stories on this channel, strange ones, dark ones, stories that I spent a long time verifying, checking sources, making sure the details held up. This one is different. I cannot fully verify it. The primary source is a single document, a handwritten account left by a man named Thomas Ulrich, a retired archivist from Portland, Oregon, who died in 2019 at the age of 78. The document was found among his personal papers by his daughter, who passed it to a researcher who eventually shared it publicly. I am including it because the details are too specific to dismiss, and because one element of it connects to something I was not expecting. Thomas Ulrich spent 31 years as an archivist at a university library in Portland. He was, by every account, a methodical and precise man. His colleagues described him as someone who did not deal in approximation. If Thomas said something, he had checked it. If Thomas wrote something down, it was accurate. His handwritten account begins in 1987, the same year he retired, and describes something that happened to him in the final year of his working life. He writes that in the spring of 1987, a box of uncatalogued materials arrived at the library from an estate donation. This was not unusual. Libraries receive estate donations regularly. The box contained documents, photographs, and personal papers from the estate of a man whose name Thomas records, but which I am not going to use here for reasons that will become clear. Thomas began cataloging the materials. Standard procedure. He was thorough, and he was slow, and he spent several weeks working through the box. Near the bottom, he found a collection of photographs, old ones, black and white. The photographs appeared to show interiors, rooms, corridors, large open spaces, industrial looking. Thomas could not identify the location from the images alone. He noted that the photographs were unusual in one respect. In each of them, there were figures, standing in the rooms, facing away from the camera, partially obscured by whatever was in the space, machinery, furniture, hanging materials. He writes that there were different numbers of figures each time he looked at the photographs. He writes this plainly, without distress, the way he writes everything, as an observable fact requiring documentation. He writes that he counted the figures in one photograph 7 times over the course of a week and got a different number each time. He writes that on the 7th count, one of the figures was facing the camera. He writes that he recognized the face. He does not say whose face it was. He writes only, "I knew this person. This person is not living. I will not write the name here because I do not want the name in the record." He cataloged the photographs, completed the donation processing, and did not think about them again for many years. Until, he writes, he saw a news article in 2011 about a photographer named Daniel Marsh who had been hired to document a textile mill in Greensboro, North Carolina, and who had abandoned the assignment after photographing something inside the building that he refused to discuss publicly. Thomas Ulrich writes that he read this article and felt what he describes as a very specific and unpleasant recognition. He writes that he went back to the library the following day, even though he had been retired for 24 years, and asked to access the archived estate donation from 1987. He was told the materials had been transferred to off-site storage in 1999 as part of a reorganization. He requested access to off-site storage. He was told the relevant section of off-site storage had experienced a water damage incident in 2004, and that materials from that section had been assessed and disposed of if too damaged to preserve. He asked about the photographs specifically. He was told they were among the materials disposed of. Thomas Ulrich writes that he does not know what was in those photographs. He writes that he does not know what was in the textile mill. He writes that he does not know what knocked on Diane Purcell's walls. And here I stopped reading because Thomas Ulrich's account was written in 2018 and Diane Purcell's name was never made public. The 911 call was recorded under her name internally, but the incident was never reported in any news outlet. The county logged it as a welfare check. Diane Purcell is not a public figure. Her name does not appear in any searchable record related to that night. Thomas Ulrich should not have known her name. I have no explanation for that. His account ends with 2 sentences. He writes, "I have spent a long time thinking about what these things have in common. I think the answer is that they are not different things. I think it is one thing in many places, and I think it has been here for much longer than we have, and I think the only reason most of us never encounter it is that it has not decided to show itself to us yet." And then, below that, in slightly different handwriting, as if written at a different time, perhaps much later, a single line. He writes, "It showed itself to me last Tuesday. I am not going to describe it. I am going to seal this document and leave it with my papers, and I want whoever finds it to know one thing. It was not looking at me the way something looks at something it is afraid of. It was looking at me the way something looks at something it has already decided about. That's all 3. Sleep well. And if you hear knocking tonight, don't count the intervals. You don't want to know how patient it is.